Welcome to Mission Accomplished, The Heroes Among Us. I'm your host, Jeff Dingsor, and today is my honor to be sitting across the table from Colonel Jack Jacobs. Colonel Jacobs received the Medal of Honor in 1968 for actions in Vietnam. Colonel, it is an absolute pleasure to have you on our show today.
I'm delighted to be with you.
So, Colonel, you've had an extremely distinguished career. But before we jump into anything, let's go back and let's talk about who Jack Jacobs is. You went to Rutgers. Tell us a little bit about that, your time at Rutgers in the ROTC.
Well, it's kind of interesting. My father had served in the Second World War in the Army in New Guinea and the Philippines. And I thought that it was my obligation to serve, and I didn't want to serve for 20 years or any of that. So I didn't apply to West Point. I just wanted to do my bit and get out. So instead I went to Rutgers, went through ROTC, and stayed for 20 years anyway. I just didn't want to leave the people, and so I stayed as long as I possibly could. At the time I got to Rutgers, ROTC had just finished being mandatory. It was mandatory for a long period of time, and was voluntary, I think the year after I got to Rutgers in 1962. And I got my commission through ROTC at a time when they paid you $27 a month in your junior and senior year. And I needed the money desperately. Because I'd gone temporarily insane and got married when I was 18 years old, so I really needed the money.
Does Mrs. Jacobs know that?
No, we try to keep everything from her as much as possible. So, and then was commissioned in 1966 when I was graduated.
So, what did you get your degree in?
I started out being a chemical engineer. My father had been an electrical engineer, and I wanted to be an engineer too. And I really liked studying to be a chemical engineer until I got to organics, and that killed me. And I changed overnight from being a chemical engineer to being a political scientist. I found that much more to my liking. So I got my degree in political science, and then years later, the Army sent me to graduate school. I went back to Rutgers and got a master's in political science and wound up teaching at West Point. But I enjoyed political science, and of course I'm actively involved in commenting on national security affairs and have been for years and years.
That's an amazing start to a great career.
Well, I didn't know it at the time. I thought I was just a dirt soldier, so what did I know?
Right, exactly. Now, the Vietnam War started, remind me, that was the year...
Well, we'd been involved, interesting you should mention that. We've been involved in Vietnam for a long, long time.
As advisors, I believe, correct?
Edward Lansdale was an advisor to Ho Chi Minh during the Second World War. And as a matter of fact, when the war ended, Ho Chi Minh asked the United States if we would help him get rid of the French. And we said, no, we didn't want to do that because we're allies, and we liked de Gaulle, even though de Gaulle didn't much like the United States. And it actually had removed the French army from NATO. So in any case, and then the French got defeated in 1954. And not long afterward, we had some advisors in Vietnam. So when I was a freshman at Rutgers, it was abundantly clear that we were involved in some small way in Vietnam. By the time I was graduated, we had a fairly substantial number of people in Vietnam. And when I got to Vietnam myself in 1967, we had 500,000 Americans in Vietnam.
Wow. So when you were graduating, you pretty much knew that you would be going there.
Oh, sure. And nowadays, when people go through ROTC, they may or may not wind up on active duty. And back in those days, almost everybody not only wound up on active duty, whether you were commissioned, whatever service, Army, Navy, Air Force, and so on, you were going to Vietnam. Almost everybody went to Vietnam.
Was there a moment as you were finishing college where it fully sank in that you were going to be going to Vietnam?
Oh, no. Everybody assumed they were going to Vietnam. What didn't sink in was the violence of war, which, you'd just been simulated all the time you were training.
Right.
Training is one thing, and people ardently trying to kill you is something else again altogether. No, it doesn't sink in until you're in a situation in which people are actually trying to kill you.
Wow. That's got to alter your mindset a little bit on how you approach things, too.
Well, it's interesting you should mention that, because you would think that a shock like that would be very, very deleterious to your psychological makeup. But in fact, you have to remember that everybody is surrounded by his buddies. You're all in it together, And so everybody is going through exactly the same experience. You rely on each other, and you know that you're going to continue to have to rely on each other. And it's really kind of interesting that understanding changes your mentality completely about being in a combat situation. You know that if things get really, really difficult, there are lots of people around you can rely on, and they feel exactly the same way.
Well, there's a certain brotherhood that the military has that I think a lot of civilian people, especially today, just don't get.
No, they don't get it because they don't serve. To the extent that I grew up at all, I grew up in the projects in New York, in Queens, and every household had made a contribution to the defense of the Republic. All of my friends' fathers had served. I had friends whose fathers were missing arms or legs, and I had friends who had no fathers at all because they'd been killed in action.
Sure.
I do not remember meeting any adult male who hadn't served. Today, we've decided that we're going to outsource the defense of the Republic to a very small number of young men and women who are willing to do it. Most Americans do not know anybody in uniform. I think we're making a big mistake. You're talking to somebody who believes in universal service. I think if you're lucky enough to live in a free country, you owe it something in the form of service.
Well, I've always felt that when you go to college, or even before you go to college, when you get out of high school, I think there should be and a lot of people criticize me for this, but there should be a 2-year time when you go into the military for at least 2 years and then come out and go to college.
Well, we don't have the political will to do that.
No, you're right.
I'll give you a statistic. More people were killed on 9/11 in New York City than were killed at Pearl Harbor, a place most people didn't know where it was. Hawaii didn't even become a state till I was in high school. And yet on the 8th of December, 1941, hundreds of thousands of young people streamed off to reception stations around the country to go defend the Republic. We didn't want to do that on 9/11.
No.
And I'm an equal opportunity castigator, so it's irrelevant who I'm talking about. But the President of the United States, who was otherwise extremely admirable, got on the airwaves and said, "Don't worry about it. He said, go to a shopping center and spend money." That's not the way that you secure liberty, by having other people secure it for you. We're lucky enough to have young people out there right now who are defending this country and the way we live, and we don't even think about them. I think we're making a big mistake. I think everybody should serve. And by the way, you can do it without serving for 2 years. You could have them serve, go to basic or boot camp for 10 or 12 weeks, and then send them home. And I tell you, if you do that, you would have to convene boards to determine whom among the people who wanted to actually go on active duty we wanted to keep. And a couple of things would happen as a result of that. Everybody you meet, the bartender, the guy delivering the groceries, everybody will have had exactly the same experience of having been in uniform and crawled in the mud a little bit and threw a couple of hand grenades and so on.
Sure.
Everybody would have had exactly the same experience. And the second thing is we wouldn't have to spend Avogadro's number of dollars advertising trying to get people to enlist in the service. No, I think we're making a big mistake by turning service to this country into a voluntary exercise. Everybody owes something to make us free.
I agree. To me, national defense is like top priority.
Well, it's incumbent on all of us. We all need to own a piece of our own national defense.
That's right. So let's go back a little bit. Tell me about your time in Vietnam and what led up to the events.
Well, I was an advisor to a Vietnamese infantry battalion. In the States, I'd been in the 82nd Airborne Division in 2nd Battalion, 505th Infantry. And my entire brigade got orders to go to Vietnam as a brigade. Don't forget, I'm married. I had 2 kids at the time. Mm-hmm. I'm making $222.10 a month. But I'm on jump status, so I'm getting an extra $110 a month. I mean, you don't have to be a CPA to figure out that that's a 50% increase in salary. My entire brigade is going to Vietnam, and I'm not. I get orders separately to go as an advisor. There are 2 unpleasant things about this. The first thing is I'm not going to be with an American unit. I'm going to be with a Vietnamese unit. The second thing is I'm going to lose my jump pay. So, a third of my salary is going down the drain. I was very upset, not pleased, but I'm at the bottom of the military food chain. I know how to take orders, and off I go. And I became the assistant battalion advisor to the 2nd Battalion of the 16th Infantry of the 9th Vietnamese Infantry Division. Now, I have to tell you that the 9th Division was one of the better Vietnamese units and was one of the better led Vietnamese units. They had a lot of divisions. Some of them were not so good. And we were in an interesting area in the Delta, down in the Mekong River Delta in the swamps. About the instant I got there the first week of September in 1967. We immediately went out on an operation. I got my first taste of fire. We ran into a small unit of Viet Cong. We had a firefight. We lost some people. They lost some people. We killed or captured some enemy and so on. And it was a revelation because all of the things that I've been taught to do in training all made sense to me. I mean, the Army had done a very good job of training me and my fellow soldiers because the majority of things they told us to do, if we did them, we were okay. And the things they told us not to do, and if we did them, and we did plenty of those, were not okay. I mean, they did not work to our tremendous advantage. What I didn't know, and none of us knew, was that the Tet Offensive would occur in about 5 months. And every time we went out on an operation, we encountered a greater number of Viet Cong, larger enemy, bigger firefights, more casualties on both sides, encountered the enemy more quickly, and so on, until the start of the Tet Offensive. And at that time, at the end of January 1968, until my action, which was in March, first week of March of 68, we were in continuous combat.
I think there might be a lot of people that don't actually know what the Tet Offensive was. Can you explain what that was briefly?
Tet is the Vietnamese New Year. Lunar New Year, celebrated in Asia all over the place. And the North Vietnamese Army and the Viet Cong picked the Tet holiday to launch an offensive which they thought would defeat the Army of the Republic of Vietnam in the South. Tactically, it was a disaster for the communists. They lost an extremely large number of people. Strategically, it was a huge success. And the reason it was a huge success was that the American people had been convinced that there was no way that the bad guys were going to win, since we had overwhelming combat power. We had B-52s, fast movers, artillery, and so on, and the enemy didn't have any of that stuff.
Right.
And so they were going to lose. The Tet Offensive demonstrated, despite the fact that the communists lost on the battlefield, they won in Congress. They won in in public affairs in the United States, because it was clear then that the enemy could do whatever it wanted to do when it wanted to do, and it was just a matter of time that they'd be able to outlast the United States. And of course, they were absolutely right.
Wow. So, and I don't think, probably the vast majority of the people today have no clue.
Well, I'm not sure we teach any of that stuff.
No.
I'm not sure we teach anything in school, to be honest with you, but that's a separate story.
Well, tell us about the action that happened that brought us to the culmination of your Medal of Honor.
Well, we had been fighting a Viet Cong unit, same unit, for a long, long time. And we were doing really good work. We had killed or captured a fairly substantial number of enemy. We had taken a fairly substantial amount of terrain. And if you've got the enemy on his heels, the last thing in the world you need is for the enemy to break contact. You don't want him to break contact. But that's exactly what they did. They broke contact, and we lost them for 3 days. After about 3 days, our higher headquarters had come to the conclusion that they knew pretty much where the enemy was located, and mounted an operation on the 9th of March, 1968, in which my battalion, 2nd of the 16th, landed on landing craft at dawn on the north shore of the Mekong River and went north up to this location where the intelligence said that's where they were. Now you got to picture what the terrain's like. Absolutely dead flat. Fields of fire, 500 meters, 800 meters, 1,000 meters. Wide open rice paddies that were now dry. And they were punctuated with canals and tree lines. Fields of fire, long fields of fire. Now, when you're moving to contact, as we were, and you have some idea, but you're not absolutely certain where the enemy is, you don't want to engage the enemy with your main force. Because once you're engaged, you're engaged. You can't move around.
Sure.
So what you do is engage the enemy with the smallest possible force you can. And for an infantry battalion, this is the scout platoon. And you will almost always send scouts ahead to screen to the front and to the flanks. And I remember maybe it was about 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning. I'm looking out on the next open field, which is about 1,000 meters on the square, after we emerge from a canal. And I don't see anybody. Now, I and my NCO, Ray Ramirez, are leading we have the 2 lead companies, and to our rear are the other 2 companies with the battalion headquarters and my boss.
And you were a captain at this time?
I was a lieutenant.
A lieutenant, okay.
So I was a lieutenant and a staff sergeant with 2 of the lead companies. But ahead of us supposed to be the scouts,
Right.
So I called back to my boss, Major John Nolan, a great man. I don't think he's around anymore, who had a great deal of combat experience, had fought with the 1st Division in Operation Junction City and so on. I mean, he had a lot of combat experience. And I called back and I said, this is 3-2 Alpha. I said, I don't see the scouts in front of me. He says, well, they're there. I just talked to the battalion commander. They're there. And I said, look, I can see for about 800 meters, and they're not there. He said, well, they're out there. I'm here to tell you, what, almost 60 years later, 50 some odd years later, I can't tell you where they were, but I can tell you where they were not. They were not in front of us. And the result was that the enemy, who had had 3 days to set up a giant L-shaped ambush, let us get within 50 meters of their position and then opened up on Ramirez and I and the 2 lead companies. We lost a very large number of killed and wounded in the first 10 seconds of the engagement. Not a very nice situation. And we were all out in the open and so on. And, I was badly wounded, and everybody was badly wounded or dead. The fact of the matter is that in a situation like that, when you're with your buddies, and as difficult as it is, you've come to the conclusion that something has to be done. It's a genuine crisis, All the time we're talking to people who tell us everything's a crisis. If everything's a crisis, then nothing's a crisis.
Exactly.
A crisis is a very specific set of circumstances.
Right.
Things are really bad. They're getting worse. Something has to be done. It has to be done right now. And if it isn't done right now, everything's going down the drain. There are very few situations that are like that in real life. In combat, they happen very frequently. And in this situation, it was absolutely the case. And one comes to the conclusion that something has to be done and that you may be the only person who can do it. And if the situation were reversed, and if somebody else could do it, and your life depended upon whether or not they acted, they would do it, because you're all in it together. I'm reminded of the observation by Benjamin Franklin before the Revolutionary War, when he wrote, "We either hang together or we will surely hang separately." And anybody who's been in the crucible of combat, who's been in a difficult situation, in any kind of crisis, knows that's exactly true. We got to hang together. And that's exactly what happens in the most difficult periods in the middle of combat. So, you got to go save the good guys and kill the bad guys. And then I ran out of blood and sat down to take a rest and couldn't get up.
Wow.
And then eventually got evacuated.
Well, thank God for that they came and got you out of there.
They did. Major Nolan did. Discovered me. I got medevaced by a Navy gunship pilot who had lost his wingman trying to save some of us, and came in anyway. He's gone now, a guy named Wes Weseleski. And when I was in the hospital, it turned out that his skipper didn't like him. It was a Navy gunship pilot, flying old B-model Hueys that the Army had sold to the Navy. The Navy had subsequently painted, flat gray with a 4-inch brush. You could even see in bas relief under the paint U.S. Army on the tail boom.
Huh.
A terrific man. His skipper didn't like him and tried to court-martial him. And I got interviewed for an Article 32 investigation, which, as the military people know, is the military equivalent of a grand jury procedure. I refused to. I yelled for the doctors and the nurses to go drag this guy out of this poor Navy lieutenant commander with a clipboard. They dragged him out before I ripped my IVs out and strangled him to death. Anyway, what are you talking about? This guy saved our lives. In any case, ultimately, he wound up getting the Navy Cross.
That's fabulous.
So, but the object lesson here is that in combat, Navy Cross, court-martial, Navy Cross, court-martial. It's kind of a jump ball. And
much better PR for the Navy Cross.
True, but I remember being in a firefight before all this happened. I had no idea what I was doing. I needed some guidance. I called my boss, a previous boss, and I said, I don't know what to do. You got to give me some guidance. And he said, And by the way, every time I press the push-to-talk button, you can hear World War III taking place. And he says, and this guy had a lot of experience too. His name was Richardson, Major Richardson. He says, well, I'm not there, so I can't give you a complete evaluation of the situation. I will give you a bit of advice, though. I said, what is it? What is it? He said, you better do something, even if it's wrong, out here. And he was absolutely, positively right.
Right.
You don't think about the niceties of anything. You gotta do what you need to do in order to save your buddies and eliminate the bad guys. And if you don't do that, you're not doing your job.
President Nixon actually pinned the medal on it.
Yes.
What was that like?
Well, I don't remember much about the ceremony. There were 4 of us who got decorated in the same ceremony for different actions in the Army. And interestingly, we're the only people decorated together who are still alive. And I think I'm pretty sure we're the only people to be decorated for the ceremony to take place on the White House lawn. They had set up a platform on the lawn, and the thing that I remember most about the ceremony was came out of the East Room and came out of the Oval Office there were 4 of us with the President, Secretary of Defense, who was Melvin Laird at the time, Secretary of the Army, Stanley Reeser, the President's Army aide, a colonel named Coffey, and we marched out onto the platform. And what stunned me was not being at the White House, not being in the Oval Office, not being decorated, but the sea of people in front of the platform.
Wow. They
had opened up the gates to the White House lawn. They let off the entire government workforce. If you wanted to come down and watch the ceremony, if you were anybody could come on.
And it sounds like most of them did.
Yeah, I mean, if you were a passerby, a tourist, a terrorist, it didn't matter. You could just come out on the White House grounds and watch the ceremony.
Wow.
Today, you can't even drive down Pennsylvania Avenue. It was a beautiful fall day, sunny and warm. But the thing I remember most is this sea of people as far as you can see. And when people ask me, what do you remember about your Medal of Honor ceremony? It was all these people in the White House grounds.
Now, at this point, you were done your tour in Vietnam. You were home now.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Well, I came out of the hospital and I was home and then became a company commander down at Fort Benning and then was decorated.
Okay. So when did you so you stayed in or were you discharged or?
No, I stayed in.
Right.
But I was at a cocktail party up here in New Jersey, as a matter of fact. And a guy who's still a great friend of mine, who had been a Marine A-4 pilot in Vietnam, and then after about 8 years or so, went back to family business on Wall Street, said to me, he says, when are you going to get out of the Army? And I said, well, I wasn't planning on getting out of the Army, He said, well, you've been in for 20 years, you can get out. I said, yeah, but I don't want to get out. He said, you need to get out. You need to retire from the Army and come to work for me and learn the bond business. And when I went home, Sue said, what's the bond business? I said, I have absolutely no idea, but it's 3 times what I'm making as a colonel in the Army. I'm going to get out. I was 42 years old. I was making $40,000 a year as a colonel in the Army. I had already put my daughter through college. I had a son in college. I had another son I'd have to put through college. And I realized that as much as I loved the service, I probably should retire and start making some money. And that's what I did. But I had never taken an economics course in my life, could barely balance my checkbook, and jumped right into the finance business. And I'll tell you why it worked. And you know this is true. If you've worn the uniform, you've had more authority and responsibility at an early age than anybody else. And I had to go learn the bond business. But how hard could it be? Nobody's shooting at me, and I've already had plenty of authority and responsibility. And if you ask You ask anybody who hires people, they'll tell you the best people to hire are people who've served, because they've had so much authority and responsibility, and they can learn anything in about 10 minutes. So my last assignment when I was in the Army was teaching at the National War College, and the commandant of the National War College was an Air Force 2-star named Perry Smith, who commanded the first deployed F-15 wing in Bitburg. And General Smith became the correspondent, the military analyst for CNN and then subsequently NBC. And the war in Iraq was getting started. And they said, so we got to get ready to decide what we're going to put on the screen and prepare for all this. And General Smith said, listen, I'm a fighter pilot. I know how to blow stuff up. I know how to drop bombs, shoot down airplanes, and so on. Is this going to be a war on the ground? And I've got a little bit of ground experience, he said. But you need to get somebody who's been shot at and hit. That's what you need. I said, do you know anybody? He said, well, I haven't spoken to him in a long time. And he gave him my phone number. And the MSNBC senior booking producer called me up and said, how would you like to be on television? I said, well, sure. Yeah.
And you were how old at the time?
Oh, I was already retired from finance now. I was already, it's 23 years ago, so I was 57 years old.
Okay.
So they said, we're going to send a car to come pick you up. Oh, wow, that's terrific. Wow. Sent a car, picked me up, took me to the studio, gave me a sandwich. Went on the air for like 2 minutes and 35 seconds. It came off. And she came off and said, that was terrific. How'd you like to come back tomorrow? And I said, you're going to pick me up again? Yeah. You give me another sandwich? Yeah. Next day, the same thing. Came after the hit and said, how would you like to come back tomorrow? I said, I tell you what. I said, if this is going to carry on for some period of time, why don't you have your lawyer call me up? That was 23 years ago, and I'm still with him.
Let's start to wrap things up. Then I want to close up with, if you could go back to your younger self, what's the one piece of advice you would give yourself as a young man?
Well, don't get married when you're 18. I think that's a very bad idea. I mean, I got a great deal of show for it, but I wouldn't do that. And it's interesting that the current crop of kids they wait until they're much older to get married, if you get married at all. I mean, I've got grandchildren in their 30s, and only one of them is married, and there are no great-grandchildren. It's very astonishing. We wouldn't have done that back then. But that's one piece of advice. But I'm often asked, what bit of advice, leadership advice, would you give?
Right.
Because I talk to kids all the time. I think there are a couple of things, and they're both really important. The first thing, and the thing that I talk to military people in uniform about, because frequently they're getting deployed, you know. After I finish talking to them, they're off getting shot at. You've got to be technically and tactically proficient. You got to know your business. Remember when I was talking to you about my first firefight?
Sure.
I mean, I was happy that I was trained the way I was, because without that, I wouldn't have survived, and my friends wouldn't have survived. So you got to know your business, because your knowledge is going to be tested by the enemy. That's the first thing. The second thing is, it's kind of interesting. Everybody's got a hero of one sort or another, people they admire who are great leaders and so on, and they try really hard to be that person. You can't do that. No. I'm reminded of an observation of all people, Oscar Wilde, who when asked the same sort of question, give me a bit of advice, you know. He said, be yourself. Everybody else is already taken. I see a thing that you do that's really good, and it's really useful, and it really works. I'm going to do that. And him too? I'm going to do that too, and I'm going to do this. You can do all that stuff, but you can't be you. Only you can be you. And right. I can't be that guy. Right. I can do some of the things he does that are successful, but I can't be him.
You could even possibly learn to do it better, but that doesn't mean that you're him.
but you can't be him. And to the extent that people try to be somebody else, they fail. Invariably, they fail. Yeah. No, you got to be yourself. Everybody else is already taken.
Yeah. Any closing thoughts for us as we wrap this up today?
Well, I've got an opinion on just about every subject. We're living in a world which appears much more fragmented than ever before. All kinds of things going on that we can't. We feel that we don't have an effect on them, and it's true. I mean, life is more complicated, and it's much more complicated than any one of us has the ability to control. Times have changed dramatically. What we have to do is something that we haven't done for a long, long time, and that is to be informed. When you and I were young, everybody was informed. Nightly news was on for 30 minutes. There were newspapers. You read the newspaper. The dumbest guy in my high school graduating class, the guy who finished dead last, even he could read an article in the New York Times and write a one-paragraph answer to a question based on it. It wouldn't be Hemingway, but every sentence would have a subject and a predicate in it.
Right.
And it would make sense. You can't get that out of people graduating from Harvard today.
Well, nobody knows what subjects and predicates are anymore.
This is correct. And we're making a big mistake by not ensuring that we are well informed, but more importantly, that the next generation is well informed. If we don't do that, then all of the exertions of the people who came before us, who served and sacrificed so that we would enjoy freedom, they will have all been in vain. We've got to make sure that we and succeeding generations stay informed so that we can preserve liberty.
Fabulous. Fabulous. Colonel, it has been an absolute honor and a pleasure to have you.
Well, thanks for having me on. I apologize for being so prolix, but I don't get an opportunity to talk to sentient beings very often. So
thank you. I'm honored to be among that crowd.
This is a treat. This is a big treat for me.
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today on this episode of Mission Accomplished, the Heroes Among Us. And as you can see, it was such a great honor having Colonel Jack Jacobs with us today. Colonel, thank you again for coming on and sharing your story. So that wraps things up for today. We've got other episodes coming out in the future, and stand by because we're going to let you know when they're coming. Have a great day.
For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action at the risk of his life, above and beyond the call of duty, Captain Jacobs, then First Lieutenant, Infantry, distinguished himself while serving as Assistant Battalion Advisor, 2nd Battalion, 16th Infantry, 9th Infantry Division, Army of the Republic of Vietnam. The 2nd Battalion was advancing to contact when it came under intense heavy machine gun and mortar fire from a Viet Cong battalion positioned in well-fortified bunkers. As the 2nd Battalion deployed into attack formation, its advance was halted by devastating fire. Captain Jacobs, with the command element of the lead company, called for and directed airstrikes on the enemy positions to facilitate a renewed attack. Due to the intensity of the enemy fire and heavy casualties to the command group, including the company commander, the attack stopped and the friendly troops became disorganized. Although wounded by mortar fragments, Captain Jacobs assumed command of the Allied company, ordered a withdrawal from the exposed position, and established a defensive perimeter. Despite profuse bleeding from head wounds, which impaired his vision, Captain Jacobs, with complete disregard for his safety, returned under intense fire to evacuate a seriously wounded advisor to the safety of a wooded area where he administered life-saving first aid. He then returned through heavy automatic weapons fire to evacuate the wounded company commander. Captain Jacobs made repeated trips across the fire-swept open rice paddies, evacuating wounded and their weapons. On 3 separate occasions, Captain Jacobs contacted and drove off Viet Cong squads who were searching for Allied, wounded, and weapons, single-handedly killing 3 and wounding several others. His gallant actions and extraordinary heroism saved the lives of 1 United States advisor and 13 Allied soldiers. Through his effort, the Allied company was restored to an effective fighting unit and prevented defeat of the friendly forces by a strong and determined enemy. Captain Jacobs, by his gallantry and bravery in action in the highest traditions of the military service, has reflected great credit upon himself, his unit, and the United States Army.